Good day, everybody. This is Reanimated. My name is Stuart. I am one of your hosts, and joining me is the intelligible H.A. Conrad from New York. Hello.
Hello, hello. How are you?
Super great. Thank you for asking. Good to be back. Well, it's not really our wheelhouse. Vampires are our second love,
Mm,
but we are talking about vampires today with the very struggly film. Not the film is struggly, but it's getting released was a big problem.
yes.
We're talking about Salem's Lot, the yet another remake of this story by Stephen King, a story that he has said was his favorite story he ever wrote in a couple different interviews. And I don't know that this really holds up to the original, but we're going to be talking about that after we talk about a little bit of news, and I look forward to that.
Like Stephen King has talked a lot about this, and I thought it was pretty not funny, but interesting that as this was having some of its production difficulties, that he was sort of getting into this like social media blitz to try to get make sure it
Well,
got
they credit him with getting
yeah,
it finally released by
yeah,
his weird tirades on Twitter, which he's since left or
right.
been kicked off of. But yeah, honestly, if that was what pushed it over the edge with Warner Brothers or whoever, like more power to him. Great job, Stephen King.
Yeah. So, but let's hop into our couple news stories and we can get into it.
The news story number one. These are both articles from Collider in the past couple weeks. News story number one is just a funny
Yes.
idea, but I'm also pumped about it. So it's laughable, but also kind of exciting. The
Yeah.
headline here is We're picking up the torch. Scott Gimple wants there to always be a Walking Dead project on TV. And yeah, I mean they've been doing that successfully since 2010.
Yeah.
So already have achieved the goal. But I think this is a recent quote because he describes in this article one of the things they loved about Walking Dead, and apparently this is an idea that Robert Kirkman had originally when he was doing the graphic novel. He just wanted there to be a never-ending zombie story, and The
Right.
Walking Dead could be that because of the world building and the intertwining stories of characters.
Yeah,
And
and I would say with the graphic novels, that's how it feels. Like it does always feel like no matter what, you do want to know what's next, or there is something that's next. Like it's never just ended, and so I feel like that is what they are trying to do here, which I thought was pretty funny. But I think we are already kind of knew that this was the idea just based on what we've seen over the years, but for him to say it out loud and in this is kind of
mhm,
fun.
yeah. There's no announcement of what another spinoff might be because we already have seasons 3 and 4 of Daryl Dixon coming. So there's 2 more years of at least that show that we know of coming for sure. I don't know if there'll be more Negan and Maggie after this season. I'm not sure that they've committed to anything beyond that.
I would really love it if they came up with a spin-off with Heath, like that just became its own thing.
Finally, that key card makes sense.
Right.
Oh my God, that would be
It'd be kind of
I would
awesome.
totally stand up and applaud if they came up with like a Heath spinoff and that actor is just like, sure, I'm not busy right now. I'll do a TV show with you guys.
Yep.
Because
I
they
mean,
can. Like they also there's so many loose ends. Like the girl from Fear the Walking Dead who was on the airplane who
mhm.
then like was joined the pirates and then left in season 2 of Fear the Walking Dead. She could totally come back. She's not a girl anymore because that was like 10 years ago. But she could come back and have her own show probably, right? Like there's so many different loose threads that they could pull back into a
Yeah.
show.
And Corey Hawkins is the actor who played Heath,
Yeah,
and he's been pretty busy, but I feel like he would make time in his schedule to come back as Heath. In fact, that's my fantasy. Come
well, there
on,
you
Corey,
go.
do it. Well, maybe there will be a campaign and Scott Gimple can start rallying everybody to get this made.
I mean, not to mention all of the different actors and characters that they discovered or pulled together for Tales of the Walking Dead, and the anthology idea could definitely still have legs for more seasons too. There are so many ways for Scott Gimple's vision to be realized here. So I I say go for it, Scott. Go for it, AMC. Make the never-ending zombie show.
Yep. And then in other news, we had talked a little bit about this, but the Daisy Ridley Australian zombie film, or it was filmed in Western Australia. Bury the Dead, and that is going to be premiering at South by Southwest in March. And then I don't know that there are other plans beyond that, but typically what happens is they see what the reception is and then make a plan for distribution or try to sell it for distribution. So it does look like the stills and the little bit of the trailer that we saw looks pretty good. Um, and then she did an interview in this just talking about how different people had different reactions to it. Some saying it was really scary, some saying it was sad. Her nickname for it was like Sad Sad Ava or something like that.
Yeah.
She says it's about the grief process, which, this is, I think the premise of it is that she's looking for her husband.
Hmm.
Um, in the midst of a zombie apocalypse. So I'm really excited to see it. So we don't have that long to wait to see how it goes. And I have a feel, usually they do something after South by Southwest.
Have you seen much of her other than Star Wars? Daisy Ridley's
No,
performance?
no, I mean, I think she doesn't probably need to do much. But
She's set, yeah.
yeah, but I mean, I think she's probably choosing projects pretty carefully. So this is kind of cool that she picked this.
Yeah.
That she's kind of, trying to, I think, branch out a little bit. So, let me see what she's been in. Oh, she's actually been pretty busy. So but it seems like smaller things. But you know, yeah, these are all very different than, um, obviously Star Wars. So she did like a psychological thriller, The March King's Daughter, which I had not heard of. And then something just came out last year. She was The Young Woman in the Sea. Had you seen that?
I haven't seen anything else that she's
Yeah.
done.
So I think, I would imagine probably all the fanfare and everything around the Star Wars franchise, she's probably picking things pretty carefully. So, which I don't blame her. And usually you see people do that after it. But it looks like, I mean, like she's had several projects like in the past couple of years, like even if they are not the sort of the big blockbuster,
Yeah.
it looks like she's picking pretty like independent things to do.
I mean,
So
the movie the thing is she's doing like press junkets for other films while she's
right,
talking about this too.
right.
So the movie that's coming out, I think in sooner, it's even mentioned in this article, is called
Cleaner.
Cleaner, and it's with Clive Owen, and it's an action, it's an action
Yeah.
film. And it's coming out actually in like 5 days. So that, very different sorts of
Yeah.
films.
But I
But
kind of like that she's doing that because I think you have to do that. You
oh
don't want to
sure.
be, I think the danger of doing like a franchise like Star Wars is that you get pigeonholed into like one
Yeah.
type of role or one type of like, genre. And so it looks like she's been very careful
Yeah.
to choose many different things. And and that can help her spread her wings a little bit, help her sort of deepen that bench of projects that she's doing.
I
And
wonder, this is always so interesting the way actors pick projects or how they get assigned to stuff. But like looking at her co-star from Star Wars, Adam Driver, and his most recent high-profile disaster, Megalopolis. Have you seen any of that or any of the
mm-mm.
writing around it? I mean, it's going to be available to watch here on streaming pretty soon because it did very, very badly in theaters, and it was it's a Scorsese film, I think. So Adam Driver has clearly not only done like, auteur visionary films, he also did The Dead Don't Die since Star
Yep.
Wars, and other smaller projects. But it is always it's like an interesting equation that actors have to kind of, navigate along with their agents or whoever.
Yeah, and I'm looking at some of I mean, it looks like the one that she did last year, Magpie, that was premiered at South by Southwest last year, and it was a neo-noir thriller. Um, like a lot of it looks more independent and smaller projects, which again, like sometimes people just kind of go to ground and don't like because it's too overwhelming. So I think it's pretty cool that she's choosing these things just to like to try out many different things. And I would say it's probably easier. There's no way she wasn't getting offered like probably huge productions and like
Hmm.
things that were probably pretty big paydays and things like that. And that's not what she's choosing to do, which I think is kind of awesome. So I think I'm looking forward to seeing this, and I'm actually gonna check out a couple of these other things because they look pretty good. So
Yeah,
I'm all about a neo-noir psychological thriller.
who isn't? So we'll keep an eye out for Never-Ending Walking Dead and Daisy Ridley's We Bury the Dead coming up, you know, forever in the case of Walking Dead, and sometime after March in the case of We Bury the Dead with
Yeah,
Daisy
we'll
Ridley.
keep everybody posted on our Bring Back Heath project.
I mean, I feel like it's a pitch that could work out. You just got to get
I
Corey
think it
Hawkins.
should. I think Corey Hawkins is going to be on board. He was so great. He's
He
very good.
barely had lines. That's
He's
probably why he
very
got off the show to begin with, because he was
probably,
hardly even
but
used.
wouldn't it? This would be amazing to do that. I think it could be really
I mean,
successful.
we
I'm
know
not
he's a
even
good
kidding.
actor. Yeah.
He's so good. All right, but let's go into. I'll get off that. I'll start the campaign after we get off this podcast.
So,
Um,
yeah, Salem's Lot,
yeah,
Jerusalem's Lot,
yeah,
2024. This film was shot in, God, what year? Do we even know?
2020 or 2019.
20 or 2021?
No, no, because I thought it was supposed to come out during the pandemic, or it was like 2019 was maybe when they
It was
got the green light to do
announced.
it.
Because, yeah, some of the actors were not announced until, yeah, so Lewis Pullman wasn't even selected to portray the lead until 2021.
Okay, so
Principal
maybe
photography started on September 6th. Damn, he got the job a month before they started shooting. I don't know how normal that is. Maybe that's super normal, but
mm,
so they shot this in 2021, and I will say that there's one way you can tell, which is that the kid who plays Danny, his did you recognize this kid? Do you ever watch The Boys?
yeah.
So that's not that kid from The Boys. I was like, oh, that's Homelander's son. It's not. They're twins. That's his twin brother.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, it's crazy. They both of the twins have been in a couple movies together or and shows. Big Little Lies
Oh, yep.
was one of them. They play Nicole Kidman's kids in that first season,
Hmm.
which I haven't seen any other seasons of that. But yeah, so the kid who plays Danny is named Nicholas Crevetti, and he is one of two Crevetti brothers who are identical. And one of them also his brother happens to play Ryan Homelander or whatever whatever his last name is in The Boys.
Yeah. Um,
I was kind of freaking out when I figured that out. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Um, so sorry, yeah, I kind of went straight into one of the trivia things that I thought was the coolest thing.
I know
What do
that's.
you think about this cast, other
I
than
think
Nicholas Crevetti?
it's a pretty good cast. I really like a lot of the people that are in it. Like Spencer Treat Clark. I was like, where do I know this guy from?
Yeah, child
I
actor, right?
Yeah, Unbreakable is what I kept coming up with.
Unbreakable,
Um,
yeah. And Mystic River.
yep.
He's yeah, he's got a pretty long filmography going back
Yeah.
to 1995 even, when he must have been tiny. He's done some Law
And
and Order, Mad Men.
yeah, no, I mean he's done a lot. So this was, just it was one of those faces where I'm like, I know this dude.
Yeah.
And then Alfred Woodward
He looks enough like the lead that I wonder if he wasn't in the running to play Ben
might have been.
Mears.
He might have been. And then Alfred Woodward as Dr. Cody. I always love her.
She's great. Yeah.
Amazing.
I've been watching a lot of C, the Apple TV
Oh, she's so good.
show, and she's so good in that.
It's really good. I loved her like at being like there's a lot of like some of the things that like her reactions to things are so awesome in this. So
Hmm.
good.
And
Um
her character, Dr. Cody, is a uh, Jimmy Cody is the
yeah,
original
yeah.
role that I guess that what she would have been playing, but
It's, but
reframed to
I'm
be, I don't know
I
what her first name is in this.
yeah, I don't either. But I thought I thought she was fantastic in this. The oh, what
What
is it?
about the lead man and woman, Lewis Pullman, who looks so much like his dad in some
I know
scenes
it's
that
a
I
little
was losing
creepy.
my mind.
Yeah. I
Uh,
wanted him to be like, this is my Independence Day.
yeah, exactly. And then Mackenzie Lee, who doesn't have a ton of credit. I mean, she has some, but considering
Yeah.
she's been active for years, she's been active back since 2011, but only has like 7 movies under her belt and then a bunch of TV.
Yeah.
But I thought she was really good.
And then there's other just really great character actors like John Benjamin Hickey plays Father Callahan. I thought Bill Camp as Matt Burke was really
He
just
did great. Yeah.
amazing, and he plays that particular role. He's like this kind of like hard-worn New Englander teacher kind of thing. Like he did a really I just thought he was like this fantastically good job. So I don't know. He's just that kind of character actor
I
that
I was
feel
surprised because I didn't really recognize his face, but then he was so strong in this. I was like, wow, this guy must be a known entity that I just have not been keeping up with.
I knew him from Molly's Game,
Okay.
but he's been in like I feel like he's been in a lot of stuff just as like that kind of like a character actor. And I feel like he's been I'm let me I'm gonna cheat and look up. Um yeah, he's been in it looks like he's been like in Law and Order, The Good Wife, Leftovers, like Night of, like he's just been kind of a consistent working character actor.
Hmm.
And then so it looks like he's done a lot of TV, but also a lot of state like theater work, which also makes sense. So often you'll see that people who do that are like you may not see them quite as often in other things. So but he seems like he's been very, very busy, just like a consistently like consistent working actor, which is cool. But I
Yeah.
thought he was awesome in this. And then there's we have of course, a Game of Thrones person in this.
Not just Game of Thrones, he was also in a zombie movie that we've reviewed, and I'm forgetting the name, the World War II one.
Oh, is he in
Uh,
that?
yeah, he plays the main German bad guy, I'm pretty sure.
Oh,
And
so
what's it
this
called?
is
Overlord. Yeah, he plays Wafner.
Pilu Asbeck or John Philippe Pilu Asbeck. He's a Danish actor. I guess I didn't remember him in that, but that makes sense. But he was Euron Greyjoy in Game
Yeah.
of
I think
Thrones.
that's what we probably would know him better for. But
That's what I knew.
since he's done a zombie thing that we've talked about, I figured throw it
Yeah.
out there. But he's done a ton. This guy works a
Yep.
lot, so
Yep.
but a lot of
Uh,
it is in Danish.
yes. Um, and then yeah, so like the cast is really great. Deborah Christopherson, who's like also another very well-known character actor, and you've seen her in like just tons of things.
And don't
And
forget William Sadler, Die Hard 2, and many other films. The Pacific, Chesty Puller, and he plays the police chief Parkins. I think that's his name.
hmm,
Um, Parkins Gillespie, who is kind of a cautionary
great.
tale in this film.
Yes. He does not like to work.
He doesn't really love Law and Order or working very
Nope,
hard.
nope. He's just like kind of hanging out.
Honestly, like his character is worth mentioning because he's one of like 2 characters in this whole film who the vampires treat differently.
Yep.
Because of the way he goes out, which is kind of curious. I'm not sure why they did it that way. There are some curious things about this film because apparently it was edited down from 3 hours to what's the running time for this? And by the time we see it, it's 113 minutes.
Yep.
So they cut what 60 minutes out of the movie somewhere. And so yeah, and I think it kind of shows in some places, especially after you figure out, oh, they cut a bunch of it. Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense because of things that get mentioned once or twice, but not enough in a way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And then
then
James Wan is the director. Or sorry, he's not the director, but he's a producer on this. The director is Gary Dauberman, and his yeah, he's got some. He's got Until Dawn is one of his films that's coming out soon. That's like a uh anthology horror film apparently. I've been reading a little bit about it, and he did The Nun,
hmm,
Annabelle, Wolves at the Door, um, It, and It Chapter 2. So he's got some good horror, genes, and apparently really wanted to make this as close to the source material as he could in some interviews.
Yep.
Anyway,
And then there's the big bad who plays Barlow.
oh yeah, who is that?
That is Alexander Ward. But then there's also like who's supposed to play um well, we'll get into some of the plot points of this, because there's a little bit of a, for me, confusion about the Marston house.
That's
And
kind of what I'm getting at with the
yeah,
hour of film that was cut out.
yeah, so I feel like there were some things, and there are some specific things that we have to
Yeah.
talk about with this.
Well,
So like,
one of the things that they actually mentioned getting cut out was like a cold open with the Marston, like laying the groundwork for what happened at the Marston
right.
house. And I haven't read the book, I haven't seen any of the other films or
So
miniseries, but there's a lot of them. But they all, I think, deal more with the Marston stuff than this does.
right, and I read the books, like I read the book a very, very long time ago, and this was, time when like Stephen King books, like he is an amazing character writer, and that's one of the things that he excels at. And apparently, just sort of part of what inspired him with this book was a nightmare he had, which was of this guy that had been like 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 a basically a corpse that was hanging, and the corpse turned around and it was like there was some name on it, but it turned out it was like Stephen King thought it was like him. And so he used this thing as like the premise, so we can get into that, but they cut out all of that part for this
Hmm.
movie, which I feel like they missed out on some really helpful character and plot building. So we can talk about that. It felt incomplete, I think, because of that.
Yeah, and I think that is reflected in the reviews that this film got, which was not great. Like a lot of 2 stars sort of reviews, um, maybe related to the fact that it did cut some corners when it comes
So
to
we
the
can, I
backstory and
mean,
the lore.
and we could talk about that a little bit. So, like, the whole premise of this is that Ben Mears, who's like the main protagonist, comes into town, and he, as a kid, had this, like, what he thought was a dream about this corpse and whatever. And there's this whole, sort of like the whole reason why there's problems with this town, is because of this main kind of like, I don't know if he's just demonic or evil, but he is sort of this like the big bad that is sort of the who laid the groundwork for this town, and the house specifically being um like kind of evil.
Are you
Um
talking about this film or the original story?
the original story. And so
Yeah.
the Hubie Marston or Hubert Marston was like this guy, and he basically there's like a very much of a like almost like an Amityville horror thing where he kills everybody in his house, his like family,
Yeah,
and
he's like a devil worshiper who like
yeah, and
sacrificed children, but then in some of the versions of this story, he is heard making a bargain with somebody before he kills
yeah,
himself, right? Like so,
yeah, and
but we
like
don't get any of this background for.
no,
And
you don't get
what's weird is like when we're introduced to Ben Mears in the movie, he is sitting in his car staring at the Marston house.
right.
And in
There's
his
no context.
backstory, there's no connection with him and the Marston house in this
No,
film. But there is like tragic backstory of his parents were killed in a car accident. But like what is his connection to Marston House? Zero for the film. But of
right,
course, I'm sure in the original there was some sort of like some connection between the death of his parents and the Marston House and why he was sitting in his car staring at it when we're introduced to his character, right?
right. So this was like this dream that had like haunted him. He didn't know if it was real or not. This was something that he felt he had to like, I think, resolve to come back. It has been a long time, but that is my recollection.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just what's
and then,
weird is like in all the films and different miniseries that have been made, I think 2 different miniseries, one starring Rob Lowe, I think is Ben Mears. They've all dealt with this material differently. So it kind of depends on how close to the novel. And, the director did say he wanted to be real close to it, Dauberman, but we don't really know. We don't, we,
well,
the way it's got edited, we don't know how close to the source material
well,
he tried to
and I
go.
think, and I do think that, part of making it a feature film and getting it distilled down into, like,
Yeah.
compressed down into, like, a feature-length film is that you're going to miss out on some of those stories. And I also think that's why they kind of tried to do, like a miniseries treatment of this, and maybe that would have been a better way to go here to add in some of those things because I do think that hook, that sort of premise, which is that this house is this kind of evil little like ground, and then there is a connection with Barlow, or like I think his name was Brecken originally in the book, and he was like some kind of Nazi era something, and that's the connection, and he eventually comes over in like he eventually comes over and settles into this town because of that connection. Like I think like but all that's cut out. So we don't know any of this. And then Mears is just kind of looking at this house. And then that's also, as we get into it, the whole reason why the first victim of Barlow is chosen is because it's like supposed to placate the spirit or the evil whatever in the house.
Oh,
But
okay.
that's not like because otherwise, and this was that I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, why would he do this? Because it seems, is it that he's too weak? If it's that way, and like, I mean, his little Barlow's
Well,
familiar,
that's a trope that we see in vampire stuff, right? Like in Midnight Mass, it's all cats at first, isn't it?
right?
Right?
But it feels like kind of weird that that's what he would have chosen, and he keeps saying it's a sacrifice. But what sacrifice? Because isn't this dude a vampire? So that's like
Yeah.
part of where I think unfortunately, I think that those plot holes could have been filled pretty easily. Like honestly, even with just a little bit of dialogue, even with
Well,
like
they
a
did all these
flashback,
cuts after they'd filmed it. Like, unless they were going to do
right?
reshoots, once they
Well, no,
decide to
okay.
cut it an hour, you're gonna end up
Do a
with plot
flashback,
holes.
do a flashback
Yeah,
to Mir's like scene, like the thing.
yeah.
They did a little exposition in the library. You could talk like, or he could talk about like his weird vision. I
The
don't think
library
it would
was
have
like exposition central.
right? Like, I don't think that it would have been that hard to fill
Yeah.
this in. So, I mean, and that's say all that said, I think this is a great cast. And honestly, I think just a little bit of help here would have made this a lot more successful. But it's not like the worst thing I've ever seen.
I really
Um,
enjoyed it also. I mean, some
um,
of it was predictable and some of it was basic. Some of the stuff that they had Mark Petrie doing was like, oh, okay. This feels a little bit, pandering to
right.
fan service and a little bit too reductive, but it was still a lot of fun. And I
It was
liked watching these characters get put through the situations that they were put through.
yeah. I mean, and there is also a little, yeah, we'll talk about it. But anyway, but we've got that set up with Mears, with Ben Mears, and
But I
there
mean,
is
that's not even the first scene is of Mr. Snow and Straker talking in the antique store, where Straker is telling it. Oh, actually, even in the opening credits, there's like this line of blood going from London to Portland,
yeah,
Maine, and
yeah.
like some shots of bills of lading and stuff like that. And then it cuts to Straker talking to this guy, Mr. Snow, who I'm sure also had a bunch of scenes cut because he basically
Mhm.
disappears from the film except for one other scene um, about like, oh, you're gonna go pick up this crate and it's gonna be really heavy and he's this is Pilu Asbeck talking to this guy, Mr. Snow, in the most creepy way possible. In the
Yeah, I
way,
mean, if you were Mr. Snow, wouldn't you be like, yeah, no, thank you.
I mean,
I don't think
the
I'm gonna take this job.
you better be paying me a real ton of money
But
because
even
also
if
you're
you
asking me to do this at night. Come on,
yeah, it's
man.
very weird. And I will say that Straker is incredibly disturbing and creepy, and the whole light of this, honestly, like the lighting and everything, they did a beautiful job. Like in this particular scene, it's a
Yeah.
little bit out of time, and they're in like this antique shop, and you
I mean,
can't
the
tell.
antique shop has great terrible. What I mean by it terrible is like it's beautifully lit, but it's
Yeah.
also clearly so dark in there all
Oh
the
yeah, yeah,
time.
yeah,
Because we
totally.
go back in there again later, and it's like, gosh, please open some curtains. My goodness.
Yep.
So I do want to just say up front also before we get too much into the plot, like there are some transitions in this film that I found to be absolutely gorgeous. Like I had to
Yes.
stop and rewind and be like,
Yeah.
that's a jam sandwich sort of things, like these
Oh, yeah.
beautiful transitions that I thought were
He did a
just,
great job. It
yeah,
was it was impressive, and so I was like, ah, that's something.
yeah.
Like
I,
really
I
good.
and the way that they would like cut time, they would move forward in time with
Mhm.
a with just like a cool transition.
Yep.
I thought was yeah, really cool. Anyway. Just wanted to just because we're starting a little negative. I also wanted to say there were some things that made me sit up and pay attention the way that they did the cinematography and the
Oh,
editing.
and I'm not trying to trend negative. I'm just saying like it is a shame because I did overall enjoy this and I don't think that it deserved quite all the negative reactions that it feels like it got. And it's interesting because I did see like a few fa like there were some fans that were saying, "Oh, you know what? This some of this was really great," but they also pointed out some of the things you and I were just talking about.
Yeah,
But I do think it looks great. I think the cast is great, and so I would say just at the outset, I actually really enjoyed this. So,
yeah,
you know,
same here.
despite those plot holes, which actually tells me, I mean, that's like more, you know, if it could have been a little stronger, and that makes me a little sad, but because obviously they put so much work into this, and it took so long
And then
to
it had such
get
a
made.
painful birthing process. Yeah,
Yeah,
my God. And it, like beyond whatever that it was that they were doing with the cuts, I'm sure the film it was in this shape for a year plus before they decided that they could release it.
yeah.
So Mr. Snow and his buddy, whose name I don't think we ever learn, end up doing this delivery, and it doesn't go super well. Mr. Snow, though, escapes by the skin of his teeth because his buddy's like, "Hey, I thought you didn't want to know," and they're at least showing some
Yep.
signs of self-preservation
Hmm.
going into the creepy basement, and once Barlow basically is ready to come out of his coffin right as soon as they get him
Yep.
there, isn't he?
He's good to go.
Yeah, he's like, all right, let's get to it. He's not gonna wait for a sacrifice, it seems like, in that scene, does it? It's like he's
Oh,
gonna eat Mr. Snow and let's get going. But nope,
yeah.
he because that's a pretty cool effect that they do with the eyes.
Yep.
You see it only a couple of times in the film, but apparently Barlow and other vampires can do this thing where they hypnotize
Kind of
you, I guess.
hypnotize you. Yep.
And so Mr. Snow is just about to be offering himself up for dinner when they bug out and they run away, and you get a quick glimpse of Barlow's face here. So it's so quick that there are better, longer views of his makeup and stuff. But what'd you think of the monster effects on Barlow?
I mean, I thought they were pretty good. Nothing like over the top, but I thought he was pretty scary. And he was
Yeah,
so beyond, like when you see him compared to the other vampires that he creates, he does look otherworldly and I thought that the skin effect and like the big jaw and like he looks alien
yeah, so
and
totally
corrupt
alien. Yeah,
and corrupt. And there's a little bit of the things that they were doing with like his skin that's like kind of like damp looking. Like he looks really creepy and he's big. So there's also that part is that he almost looks like, I mean, it's not quite as good of an effect as Midnight Mass, because that was very much like this is a to like this thing may have been human once. I don't feel like the dude in Midnight Mass felt like he had been human,
Hmm.
or the vampire or whatever it is, but this
Yeah,
felt like corruption, like a corrupted body. And so I actually thought those effects were pretty effective. And then I think almost creepier though was the people that became vampires, especially the kid vampires, were
well, yeah.
like,
There was so many of them, right? Like
right.
there was a lot of kid vampires in this. The work they do with the eyes is really cool. I'm not
Mhm.
so sold on all the effects of them flying. Sometimes
No, that was a little dumb,
it
but
felt like, yeah, a
yeah,
little hovery and
a
weird.
little too stupid. But you know, I think that was kind of like there is also a campiness to this that I appreciate and
Yeah,
like.
that's
So
true. It's a very straightforward sort of vampire story. And up to the point where everybody knows what vampires are, and they're like, pretty well educated on it almost right away. Once the our heroes start to figure out what's going on, there's not a real painful, long learning process about what to do. So that's sometimes you like it, sometimes you think, oh no, I want them to figure it out. But in this case, I was happy that they were like, oh, it's vampires. I mean, that sounds insane, but I think we know what to do.
and I liked that. I liked that it wasn't too much beating around the bush, that there was somewhat of a knowledge
Yeah.
about it. So I was like, all right. I love that the kid, Mark, like starts writing down vampire rules or
Yeah.
something like that.
Based
It's
on his
pretty amazing.
comic books. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think that was great.
So the next scene after Snow gets out of the basement alive is Ben Mears sitting in his car looking at the Marston house, which we've talked about. And the radio tells us that it's the what is it's the summer, no, it's the spring, the fall equinox or whatever. Fall, yeah. So it's September 23rd, 1975. It's a period piece. He's in like this really funky little gremlin looking car.
Hmm.
And we also meet Parkins Gillespie, the local constabulary, who's just like, don't make trouble. I don't like trouble. I don't want to have to do police work while you're here.
Yeah, I don't like working. So good, good,
Yeah.
great, great.
And we've also seen after this, we see a sign for Salem's Lot, population 1,282, small town, very diverse though.
Hmm.
And we get to hear Gordon Lightfoot Sundown. Is that the name of the song?
Yeah, and it's that song has always creeped me out, so it's a pretty good one.
I mean, it's a song about infidelity though, not
It
vampires, right?
is, but it's still creepy. It's just
It's
odd.
creepy. It's creepy. You better watch out.
Mm-hmm.
So and then we get these interesting scenes of like, quite a busy little rural downtown. I know they shot this in Massachusetts. I think they found a great little downtown street to shoot this on. It does look exactly, I feel like from the 70s. This is clearly a town that hasn't had a lot of updates.
No,
It,
and
where was this? Have you read the back?
I
It's like
saw that
Ipswich.
it may have been, but they also filmed some of this in Canada. They filmed some of this in Quebec and Toronto, it looks like, because that was like in the credits.
Filming in the state of Massachusetts took place in Ipswich and the towns of Sterling and Clinton in Worcester
Yep,
County.
that's about
And
right.
then the Princeton Public Library in Princeton, Massachusetts, which is clearly, I guess that's where we meet Mabel. I don't see any Canada on here.
Hmm. I don't know why then they had I see I did not look it up, but I just assumed that they had to have because they were thanking the Quebec whatever.
Oh,
Uh unless they were up by like the border, which is possible. So it's kind of weird. So it could be wrong. Maybe they just got some, I don't know, like like money from them or something. But anyway,
well, they found some
it
really
does look
beautiful
like
little locations in Massachusetts to film, if not also in Quebec. Uh, but like downtown Salem's Lot, quite attractive, quite
oh
nice
this
looking.
and this does look very like this looks very New England and you can do that up in Maine like there's and in parts of Massachusetts I guess but it, it it's like towns that look almost out of time, you know, like
Yeah,
they're very like just sort of like almost in like a little bit of a time bubble and it looked the treatment of this and the filming of this just like the color was beautiful like it had that it really did have that feel which is you know for Stephen King films especially like Stand By Me and things like that it's that moment where you're sort of almost in this like time warp
yeah,
so I felt like they did a pretty good job um at
yeah.
doing
Speaking of Stephen King, we've also established that Ben Mears is an author because
yes.
Stephen King can't not put himself
You
in his
can't
his
not put
stories.
himself. And I will
Uh,
say that that was a pretty funny moment between uh
Susan and him.
Susan and him where
Yeah.
she realized that.
She's actively reading his book, but then also kind of disses it. She's like, I'm just deciding if I want to finish it. And he's giving her all these, you know, Bill Pullman looks and saying, how do you like the book? Uh, and yeah, that was funny. And she also, I'm sure that her boss was probably in the film more in the original cut, but this is his only scene, Mr. Crockett, in this version of it. And so he's trying to make a deal with Ben Mears, who's looking for a place to live. But Susan tells him that he can go stay with Eva, who has some rooms to rent, and so that's where he runs off. And then the next thing that happens is we get some shots of things happening in Salem's Lot. Like there's a girl or a kid doing a newspaper route. There's a postman and there's a milkman, and these come back in
Yep.
the third act. Because here it's just like, yep, I'm delivering the mail. I'm saying hello. I'm throwing the newspapers. Everything is great. I'm delivering the milk. Perfect. Everything is working out. And I just wanted to call that out because it does come back really nicely later when, everything has gone to hell.
Yeah.
Um,
And I would also say like this is another piece where again I think they try to touch on it here, like because there's a one of the characters says this is why they chose this town, and this idea that this is like this picture perfect town, small town, but there is like this darker underbelly. There's darker things happening.
Yeah,
And then
do you
again,
pick up, I mean, do you feel like the film
so
delivers on that?
I don't see that's the part where I think with just a little bit of like exposition at the beginning or a little bit of a callback to what the original story was, I think they could have like anchored that in and just had sort of that feel. I didn't feel that sinister vibe here in the way that I think, did you ever see the show Castle Rock? That
No, no.
Stephen King, and that's also another Stephen King like kind of series. And I feel like in that they do a better job at sort of there's this underlying tension and sort of um like negative vibe happening in that town. Like there's something off, and I don't know that that comes across here, or at least
Yeah.
I feel
Because
that.
when, I mean, the police chief Parkins does say like this town is going to hell, and he
Hmm.
says it again later. Like that's his kind of repeated theme is he thinks that the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and he's going to retire and be okay. Uh, doesn't really work out that way for old Parkins, but like I don't feel like that is well represented here.
Right.
Yeah, so I think the
He
point you're
says
making.
it, but do you feel like you see it?
No,
Don't
because
feel like
like
you
yeah,
see
the
it.
postal worker, the mail, the the newspaper delivery, and the milkman being those things that we see that kind of show what quality of life is in this town, or that there is order. Those do not get across the fact that like there's no shuttered door, storefronts. There's nothing, none of that like urban blight that you might expect to see in a place that is dead on the inside, which is what Parkins is alleging. And then if you look at the synopsis of the miniseries, there's all these like terrible secrets among the people in the town, and they don't actually. I don't know if that's in the book, but they certainly don't get into that territory here. Other than maybe Susan's mom, who is a piece of
Right.
work.
Well, she is, but that could just be one really warped person. And
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like you're seeing that. In fact, what you're seeing is like, the teacher who's just incredibly kind, even though he's kind of dealing with some odd things going on. But even to the point where he breaks up the fight between the kids, he's like taking the cemetery man home because he doesn't feel well. Like there's like really good people in this town, and you
yeah.
even like the doctor and like even the priest who is damaged is still, somebody that they go to for help and seems like,
And
I
he's a
mean,
moral person. Yeah,
I guess you could say like because maybe that is the hint where it's like he's quietly she like Susan at one point when they're at the drive-in says like, oh, there's Father Callahan quietly getting drunk or something over there. And so maybe that is an indicator of the corrupt element, but I don't
yeah.
feel like it feels sinister in this town. It
When
feels
she's doing
kind
that,
of
yeah,
broken.
when she's doing that at the drive-in, she's pointing at all these different people, and none of their stories are like dark. It's okay, yeah, the like you said, the priest getting drunk, not ideal, but like, oh, there's so and so, they're breaking up for the third time or whatever. There's nothing that's like, oh, and he beats his wife, or there's nothing like that. So
Right. So, and nothing like, usually with Stephen King stuff, I thought where they were going to go with the kids is that there was something really bad happening at their house, but there wasn't. Like their
nope.
mom was like a single mom, and like, there wasn't that really sort of dark, sinister, twisty underbelly that you often see with Stephen King stories, where there's something in the background happening, and when you discover what it is, it's like really like upsetting. So that wasn't. I don't feel if their intention was to do that, I don't think it was coming through
Didn't
enough.
didn't come across. So what we do get is Danny and Ralphie are Glick are on the playground with Mark Petrie, who's kind of the hero of the
Hmm.
story in a way. Him and Ben Mears clearly are the heroes of the story. Mark Petrie's new in town, fearless, fan of Houdini. That's everything you need to know. Also a huge fan of vampires or like horror movies and stuff. And
Yeah.
so they set up a lot of his background when they go to his bedroom, and he's got like models of Frankenstein and comics everywhere. This kid is the local expert,
Yep.
and some of that stuff I felt like was too heavy-handed for sure.
He was like he knew a lot and but I liked him. I thought that that he was the actor who plays him is named Jordan Preston Carter, and I think he's really good.
Oh yeah.
And I think he's this could be a really annoying character, but he's not. He's just really good and badass, honestly.
Yeah,
Um,
that's kind of his thing. He's like
yeah.
completely fearless. And the whole thing that he's talking about with Ralphie about standing up to bullies, you're like, wow, yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I'm glad that that Matt Burke was there to also do what he did. I was expecting Richie to come back into the story. He
Yeah,
never
I thought he would
does.
too, but he doesn't. But I do like how Mark Petrie is like the the deputized familiar killer. Like he
He
just kills.
deputizes himself. He doesn't
Yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
wait.
He
He's just
doesn't.
like, all
He's
right,
just
I
like,
guess I've got to go kill Barlow at some point in the movie.
yeah,
You're like, what?
yeah,
You
yeah,
got
yeah.
there
It's not
that
like,
fast? He also
yeah,
is like, when he's making that list, and I know we're later in the film, but he's making his list of like rules about vampires. He's like, Straker is the familiar. I'm like, how do
yep,
you know that? That's
yeah.
insane. But well done. It is him. Because also, as soon as like the Ralphie and Danny have left Mark's house, they're walking back to the woods because Straker has already pulled up next to them and been creepy,
Hmm.
and then abducts Ralphie, and apparently Danny then like loses his mind a little bit. It was again not clear 100% if it was then that he had been infected by the vampire curse or later because he has amnesia and all
Hmm.
this other stuff. Um, but honestly, I think it's when he goes out in his backyard because he starts to hear the harmonica that Ralphie was given by Mark.
Yeah.
That's very foggy. I feel like his parents might have woken up to hear him yelling his brother's name in the backyard, or is it just his mom? Um, but no, that's not what happens. And the way he gets grabbed is pretty crazy.
Oh gosh, when the kids are out in the woods, I thought that that was actually one of the creepiest things.
Oh, the way Straker grabs Ralphie,
Oh,
yeah, but also the way
yeah,
that Danny gets grabbed in his backyard
yeah, yeah,
by
yeah.
Barlow. I
By
think he
Barlow.
just gets pulled straight up into the sky by his face.
Yep, that's not fun.
Um, and that was
But I
some pretty
think,
good atmospheric, building up to that jump scare. And there are a couple of good jump scares in this film.
and there are, and I mean, I do like how, you know, especially like they do build that at the beginning with Stryker and the kids, like where he's so creepy and he's like offering them a ride, and I'm like, yes, and I'm so glad the kid said no because that dude is so creepy. Um,
Nicholas Cravetti's delivery on that was like, yeah, I don't think so.
yeah, we're good.
Nah, I'm not gonna go with you. And
And then
then they
look,
wander off.
and I'll admit to you, as I was thinking this, and then suddenly they're still walking home, and I'm like, my God, how long does it take these kids to get home?
Yeah,
And
they're
but then
clearly
you find
miles
out,
outside of town.
right? But then you find out why, which is because they were, trying to avoid the creepy dude.
Yeah.
And it's like, ah, that makes sense. And then I like the way that is all set up, and then you see the two of them in the silhouette with like the sun going down, and then you see eventually like Straker pops up behind them, and it's like, it's pretty terrifying. And imagining kids in the woods, like because woods are scary, and sun's going down, and then suddenly your little brother's gone. Like I thought that setup was really great, and I thought that the filming of that was incredibly creepy, like where he
Yeah.
just pops up because they think they're alone and he's silent and he just
Super silent and then vanishes silently.
yeah,
Very,
takes
very bad. And then obviously we get to kind of see what happens to Ralphie, which was
oh
not,
Ralph.
I didn't really need that in my life, but
Oh, that to me that was probably the most upsetting part of this film, and that was what the whole thing was like, where they were talking about like the sacrifice, and I was like, oh man, like we don't need to see this. It was really that was. I'll admit to you that was I fast forwarded it. I couldn't because of the screaming and stuff. It was
Straker does like because he has interactions with a few other characters and he does tend to talk to them in a way that's kind of interesting. I think he's just like lonely because he can't talk to
yeah,
Barlow that much, I assume.
probably.
But he's like, "Oh, this is such an honor for you. You're going to be the sacrifice for Master Barlow." And then later when he's talking to
Mark.
Mark Petrie,
And Mark's like, no, no, man, that's not gonna happen. It's
yeah,
all.
Mark's already gone by the time, but he's like, "Don't worry, Master Barlow can be gentle. You'll just feel a slight, a little bit of a sting, and then oh, you're gone."
Hmm.
But in this scene, he's like, "Master Barlow, I've got your dinner," and we get to see from Ralphie's POV through this little hole in the sack. Yeah, it is a very disturbing
Pretty rough.
scene. And Straker's got his foot on him, so he can't
Yeah.
get up and leave.
No,
Like
it's like the worst nightmare,
it's bad.
especially with kids. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
and so
And
that
Ralphie's a little kid. Like
he's
this kid is
little.
6 or something.
Yeah.
It's pretty
It's very,
disturbing.
I can't, that was, to me, that was like the word, like I just couldn't. That
Hopefully
was,
they had a really good therapist on set for some of
um,
this because Straker gets
well,
like doused in blood also in this scene.
yeah. Well, you don't even really see Ralphie that much. You're just seeing
No,
his,
it's kind of from his like because he's
yeah.
looking out through the
So
hole and you can kind of catch glimpses
my,
of
my only, my
Barlow.
only, my only hope was that the kid was not, the actor was not actually
Oh,
in the
true,
scene, is
true.
what it felt like. And I hope that's the case because it's traumatizing for me to watch and I like couldn't
Yeah.
even really get through it. And that's the part where I was like, this feels really weird. Like, why would they need to do this? Because like, what's the rule? Why is he doing this? Because this seems kind of odd given
Yep.
how powerful he clearly is. Like, why would he need this? And then I remembered like, oh, this was the original plot was that this was supposed to actually placate the spirit of whatever was in this house. And that's the thing, like they just should say that. Like it's kind of weird that suddenly like,
Yep.
that this is a thing.
It's one of the blind spots of the film for sure
Yeah.
is the relation to the Marston house. And I mean
Yeah.
there's a guy credited as Hubie Marston in this cast list who clearly isn't in the film. And
Yeah.
what's funny is his last name is Mears, which is but he's, Derek Mears is a stuntman who plays, or actor and stuntman who plays Hubert Marston, but Hubert Marston certainly is not in this film, other than as someone that people refer to as
Right. Yeah, so something must have been cut out, right?
for sure, an hour's worth of content.
Yeah.
So, like I've already alluded to, Danny then gets lured outside and attacked, but then almost immediately, like smash cut to him standing by his mother's bedside saying, "I'm not feeling so good," and then very quickly he also dies. We've also had of like what do they call it, pernicious anemia, where he
Yep.
just can't create enough red blood cells, and that's where we meet Dr. Cody, Woodward's character, and we've
Mhm.
also had scenes of the town mobilizing to go and look for Ralphie out in the woods. Ben Mears has gotten involved. Ben has met Matt Burke. Ben is kind of slightly dating Susan Norton at this point, and Floyd Tibbetts, Susan's wannabe boyfriend, is also introduced in this scene and comes back very briefly later, but as a jerk.
Yep.
So yeah, that's kind of where we are. Then Danny rips into his blood bag. Everybody's very upset by this, and then dies immediately after drinking blood.
Yep.
I thought that was a bit weird, but maybe that's
Yep.
just how that goes. And then like things are obviously not great in Salem's Lot. We've got Danny's funeral. Father Callahan lets what's his name, Mike? Yeah, Mike Ryerson, the gravedigger, have a sip of his flask, and then just be like, "This is bad. They've already lost one kid. Now they lost the other." Badness. And then that's when he opens his Bible and then it cuts the transition to the sandwich. Remember
Yes.
that?
And that was so great. It
That
was
was so
really
good.
a fantastic cut.
It was really good because it's just yeah. And then Mike Ryerson apparently has fallen asleep behind a tree, and nobody thought, "Where's Mike? He needs to be, putting dirt on this grave." But apparently, it's such a small town, and Father Callahan is probably half in the bag, so I guess nobody thought to look for Mike
Guess not.
because then he starts to put dirt onto Danny Glick's coffin when he hears some thumping. I like the way that the scene unfolded. What did you think of it?
I did. I was also like, why are you doing this in the dark? Maybe you should come back later.
He's come back tomorrow. It's not like,
It
yeah,
doesn't feel like this was a like especially you're hearing pounding on that thing. I don't know. Like I don't know what I would do, but and when you open it and there's like the little dead kid in there with no like just not moving. I think that was just really I
time
mean
to go home.
this is really yeah, time to go home though. I guess as things unfolded that he was already out and about and causing mischief, but that was a pretty disturbing scene. So I thought they played it well, and I also thought that the lighting was super creepy and the effects were creepy. And
Yep.
so,
And
um,
another good jump scare here where
yeah,
Danny kind of floats up out of the grave behind Mike. We get to see
yeah,
it briefly, but
yeah.
then he's jumping on him and throwing him into the open grave. And
Yep.
and yeah, by Mike Ryerson. We barely knew ye, although he does actually kind of come back a lot
Hmm.
in the
We
film.
see him here and there. We see him here and there. We definitely see him as he's kind of going down the path of vampirism, and um, you know, Mr. Burke is trying to help him, and I gotta hand it to the Matt Burke, like the the idea of taking this, you get the sense that this guy's had problems and that like he's taking him home out of like a kindness. But if somebody's like that sick, you'd probably take them to the doctor because he does not look good. He looks incredibly weird
Well,
and
he
his
does
eyes,
say the doctor is not open until tomorrow, but you can sleep in my
right?
house until then. But yeah,
Part of me thought though that he maybe hypnotized Matt Burke a little bit because you see the little glowy eye thing kind of start. But and then he ends up going to his house. So part of me was also like, did he somehow like convince him to take him home? Because
huh,
that also felt a little like, I don't know that I would be taking somebody. And I mean, he needed help. He needed help, and they're a small town, and he clearly knows him and is worried about him.
yeah.
Um,
The invitation into the house is obviously a big part of
thing.
this story too, and that's part of the like the mainstream vampire storytelling here is that they have to be invited in, and but they
Yeah,
can also kind of coerce you to invite them in, which is
right,
interesting.
right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Burke was just inviting him out of the kindness of his heart. Like you said, he's a really good guy. But it doesn't go so well. Also in this scene, Mr. Snow is at the end of the bar. Like, why does he show up here never again? Not sure. He doesn't
Right.
even show up as a vampire.
Again, it felt like something got
Oh, for
cut.
sure. Just pointing out like well, weird loose threads that definitely got left on the editing room floor. Like
Mhm.
Mr. Snow, who was pretty instrumental for the first act, but then has this one tiny appearance in this scene and then never again. Although we do get to see his buddy as a vampire in the third act, in the very end. He's one of the vampires who comes out of the trunk of a car. I
Yep.
mean, barely recognizable, but yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it was him. Um, so yeah, Matt Burke says you can stay with me, invites him over. As soon as they get to his house, Mike is like, I feel better already. I'm like, oh, Matt.
Mhm.
Oh, I know you don't know what's going on, but I felt like I was surprised that he lasted any longer than here, because he's like, oh, there's tooth marks on your neck. Um, and Mike's eyes do go orange as Matt is closing the window in his bedroom. Um, and then he goes downstairs and hears a very loud knock on the window, and a very loud stage whisper, "Let me in."
I know.
He goes outside and sees what are Danny Glick's feet go into the window, and then it's a cut, and you're like, "Oh God, he's dead."
Hmm.
But instead, he actually manages to get away. He runs. I don't know why he goes to Ben and Susan in this
Yeah, I don't
scene,
either.
but that's where he goes instead of to Father Callahan, instead of to Parkins Gillespie, the lazy constable, like the author and the secretary
Yeah.
are the people he's like, no, you guys, you're the ones who can help me with this.
Well, I mean, I kind of think that part of why he does it, is, because they like Ben is kind of an outsider and seems to be more open than other people in the town. And maybe there's some knowledge that there's corruption in the town. I don't know,
Which we
uh,
don't know about. Yeah.
which we
So
don't know
if
about. So maybe there was something that we missed.
another thing might have gotten left here, yeah.
Agree, but I agree. It was kind of an odd decision that wasn't totally explained, like
I mean, we
why.
know that they're friendly, that they've been on good speaking terms. And Susan's there really accidentally because she's not even supposed to be in the boarding house. It was kind of funny when Eva is like, "Hello and good evening, Susan," and
Yep.
Susan behind the door is like, "Hi."
Yeah.
Dang.
Well, it just shows you everybody knows everything that's going on in that
Yeah.
town. So maybe
Yeah.
that's part of it. But I mean, look, I think the other part of it is that, like, and this was, sort of my, again, little nits, because I just feel it could have been a much richer and well-received movie. It's not, I mean, it's a campy vampire film, so I'm not looking for like totally crazy high art,
Yeah.
but I do think, I feel like Ben and Susan, I didn't feel their like that they had a deep relationship or connection like they have just met. And or
It's
it feels
we
like
had a time jump of a week, so but
we
yeah,
we
that's
did,
that's
but
it.
this like deep connection that they have, it felt like there should have been some more like building of that relationship to make later things have more impact.
I
Has it
suppose.
been?
I was feeling the immediate attraction that they had because of the all the looks that they were giving each
Yeah.
other and the way that she like invited him to the drive-in, I thought was really cute. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I felt that. I just felt like there should have been just a little bit more where they had some kind of deeper connection. But again, this is a
They don't
small,
have a ton of time to tell the love story of Ben and
right,
Susan, that's
right,
for sure.
right.
But I mean, what happens to her is still impactful just
Yeah.
because you're like, oh, she's not a final girl. You know, like it's
Mhm.
almost because it defies tropes.
It does. It does.
That you're like, oh no, Susan, what? Um,
Well, it doesn't completely because you do see that they've been, you know, entangled. So
oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
that is a trope too, that she doesn't get to live because of that, which
That's true.
kind of
Dang.
annoying. I kind of was hoping that they would get over that, but what can you do? Um, but yeah, and I do think that this little merry band of vampire hunters, I do like how they kind of get together, quickly decide what their plan's going to be. And it is a pretty like the little troop that is together is pretty funny because you've got like this kid, the teacher, secretary, the author, and the doctor.
Eventually. Mark, I feel like, is never really part of their troupe until the very end of the film. But in this first, I know yeah, in this scene with Mike in the bed, and they all go back into the house, and they're like, and the lights somehow are turned off. And so the three of them, Susan, Matt, and Ben, go into the bedroom and like feel for his pulse and feel how cold he is. And then they're like, Ben says something like, let's let the machinery take over, call the police. Even though they know they're basically dealing with vampires at this point, at least that's what Matt is telling them. Because
Yeah,
the tooth holes have disappeared. He's like, folklore says they disappear. Um, but then there's another one of these cool transitions where they appear to leave the bedroom. The
yeah,
camera goes below the bed, and you're like, "Oh, is Danny going to be down there?" But he's not. And then some feet appear and pick up the arm, and it's just that time has passed, and now Dr.
yeah,
Cody's in the room with the sheriff. I
yeah.
thought that was really,
It was a good transit. Like the transitions were really awesome.
yeah. I
They
mean,
were
there's only like four of them or so in the film, but I felt like each time they happened, I was like, "Hey, okay, that's cool."
they were really well done.
Um, I don't remember what Parkin's reactions are here, other than Mike Ryerson is dead in Matt Burke's house, and I don't think Matt is under any kind of like suspicion here. He's just like, oh, he was sick.
Yep.
Kind of a little bit curious, but I think essentially what happens here is they're just like, all right, well, take him to the morgue, and Mike Ryerson basically does get taken to a morgue, and we find out that he doesn't stay there for long. Uh, Later on, kind of curious.
It
Pernicious anemia.
pernicious
Um,
anemia, most
the
certainly.
same night that Mike has been turned or killed dead and taken away by Dr. Cody or Parkins. Danny comes to Mark Petrie's house. Danny's busy tonight. He's been making house calls. Taps on the window. Mark has some like pretty good reactions here, but also almost gets got with the old you know, what's it called? The eyes, when his eyes
Oh,
turn
the
cloudy.
old yeah. The little hypnosis trick.
He almost gets got with the hypnosis. He actually does because he's forced to open the window.
Yep.
But because we'd seen how many little crucifixes he had in his like dioramas in his bedroom, I think we were pretty confident that he was going to be okay.
Yeah. I do like how badass Mark is. He's pretty awesome. It's like, I'm gonna get you out of my room. And like,
I liked the way that the crucifixes glowed,
hello. Yeah.
even though it's like kind of bizarre. They
Yeah.
obviously have these props that are just like super bright glowing crucifixes, and Mark puts it on Danny's face and blasts him out of his bedroom, which I
Yep.
thought was great.
It was a pretty good effect. And later you see his face still marked by that later.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, and I like how Mark's like, all right, I guess I know what the problem is, and he just goes to work. So I kind of liked that. And I also liked how they could expel the vampires, like because he kind of invites him in and then he gets him out. And same thing with Matt Burke. He does the same thing. He kind of
Yeah, I revoked
rescinds
my
the
invitation.
invitation. So I liked that.
And this all happens the same night. I guess Mike Ryerson basically busts out of the morgue and goes back to Matt Burke's house this same night and
Yeah,
attacks him. And Matt fights him off with a crucifix, even though it doesn't go super well the whole time. He certainly gets his ass kicked.
he drops that crucifix a lot.
He drops it like 3 times, but eventually he gets it. He does the job. This is also right after Danny has invaded Mark Petrie's room is when he goes under his covers and writes his list and like where he's already ID'd Straker and Barlow as the two main
Yep.
culprits. I'm like,
Yep.
wow, way to go.
That's some detective work, Mark.
Yeah, his crazy wall is essentially just like a stack of comic books. Like
Yep.
he's just like, okay, yeah, that's all here.
Mm.
Um, so now we know that like things are definitely kicking off. Like vampires are just attacking people in their homes left and right. And what's interesting is we don't see it on a wide scale. We really just see it as it affects our core cast of characters: Mark, Matt, Ben, Susan, Dr. Cody, eventually, and others. But what is clearly also happening because when we get daytime scenes, it's getting harder to reach people in Salem's Lot. Somebody says the next day, and there are fewer people outside in Salem's Lot in these scenes that we're seeing now.
Hmm.
Um, Mark basically goes to the Marston house the next day with a stake, and he's going to try and kill Barlow, but Matt Burke is there first. This is where Matt Burke gets killed, basically. But Dr. Cody has been recruited because she's found that Mike Ryerson's body is missing from the morgue, and now she's getting involved, right?
Well, there was a really great moment where she's like, "What did the body just get up and walk away?" And then they go and they look, and she's just, "Well, then now we have this to deal with." Like it's a very matter of fact way. And Alfred Woodward, she's so good. She's so great. I love her in this. And she's so matter of fact and like, all right, we're gonna deal with this problem. And I mean, that is one thing where it's like the acceptance that these are vampires comes pretty quickly, and then it's like every single thing, every little bit of tool in the toolbox gets used.
Well, Mark is certainly 100% on board that they're vampires. I think Matt Burke is too. That's why he goes to Marston
She's a
House.
little more skeptical, only just like because this is just like this weird. She maybe, it almost feels like she's like maybe this is a weird medical thing. I don't
But
know, but
they're
like,
yeah, they're like, oh, let's find out if Danny Glick is still in his grave. They're like, absolutely not. I'm like, you could probably just go there and see that he
right,
was never buried and his coffin is just
right,
open.
right. Pretty
But they
easy.
don't even go there. They're like, no, let's go to the other morgue where his mom is because she died last night of pernicious anemia
Right.
because Danny was very busy last night.
And he was quite busy.
And then there's like a pretty cool scene here where Susan, Ben, and Dr. Cody are just like waiting for the mom to rise, and then absolutely she does.
Yeah.
And then they have to make a crucifix out of tongue depressors, and
Yeah.
it keeps falling apart. I thought that this was a great scene.
It was. And
Um,
also like Alfred Woodward, like her when the mom first comes back, she's like, "No, man." Like she's so disappointed.
yeah,
Just like now we have this to deal with. Like I
but
didn't
like they
want
don't even like Susan eventually asks the question like, "What do we do if she is a vampire? How do we protect ourselves?"
right.
And it's like that is when, of course, she
Starts to
raises
come back.
rises up. But
And
I'm
they
like,
all kind of
you
look at
guys
each
didn't
other.
think of this before? You went into the morgue at night. Come on, man.
Yeah, they all kind of look at each other like, "Oh, we didn't think about that." And
Yeah.
well, and that tells me that maybe they didn't think she'd actually rise, so that was like part of it too. So this is like the full on proof that this what's happening is happening.
Oh,
Nothing.
it's for sure proof.
Yeah.
Also, Mark has been abducted by Straker, and Matt Burke has been uh, gotten by Barlow. We're not sure what's happened to Mark here for one or two more scenes, but basically,
Yeah.
it's
It's lights out for Mark. Sorry,
it.
Matt.
Matt
Um,
is definitely done. There's a lot of similar names in this.
but for Mark, I do love that, similarly he was kidnapped the same as the little kid,
Ralphie, yeah.
Ralphie. And the dialogue is almost the same, which is like, oh, it's such a great honor and all this other stuff. And I just love how Mark's like, nope,
But
I'm
Ralphie
not.
was not a disciple of Houdini, so
Nope, nope. And Mark is just like, you know what? Nope. And the reaction to the, oh, it'll just sting a little and whatever. And then it's like, nope, I'm gonna take you out. And he does. And I just love that's the reaction because it feels like somewhat of a vengeance for poor little Ralphie.
and the response to this scene later, or the response to what Mark has done from the adults, like, what are you, 11? Yeah, and 3/4. And you just killed Straker?
Mhm.
I thought that was good too.
Mm. Then he's like, and
Um,
now I'm gonna kill Barlow.
and now
Like he's
I'm
just
not
like,
done.
hmm
And I made a promise to Danny that I would free him,
hmm
knowing that that means he has to kill.
Yeah.
Like Mark actually might just be a psychopath. I don't know that Mark is okay.
He might not be okay, but
He- I mean, he's upset when his parents get killed. And that's encouraging because otherwise I wouldn't be so sure about this kid. He's way too eager to like dole out death and destruction as an 11-year-old.
right.
Uh,
Mhm.
so we've also had this scene of like Ben, Dr. Cody, and Susan coming back to Matt Burke's house to be like, yeah, it's definitely vampires. And then they're like, oh, there's two of them on his
Yeah.
roof.
I guess he's done.
I guess we're a little late on the on this reconnaissance that we just did.
Yeah.
So instead,
Um,
they go to the church. They go to find professor, not professor, Reverend Callahan. And his, what did you think of his like speech here, where he's like, "Look, it's lying is a sin, but also I deal in the insane all the time." Like, what did you think of his little speech
I
here?
thought it was pretty good. I also it shows that like despite his um, the things going on with him, obviously there's a reason he drinks all the time. Um, Again, I think they could have gotten more into like the corruption of the town, which is what they're trying to go for, I suspect. I think the reason he's drinking is because there's just all sorts of weird things happening, and maybe he's hearing all the confessions of the weird and creepy things that are happening, and that's part of why he's drinking so much.
Could be.
But he doesn't really need a lot to confirm what's happening, and that evil's out there, and he kind of says that, and he's just like, well, I'm just gonna get involved and do this. But this also makes his like kind of the whole when his faith fails him. This makes it to me not as realistic because the thing is he's going into this knowing that this exists and saying he still has faith.
Yeah.
And I think he does. And so that's why it's kind of weird that his faith actually fails because if anything, this is a confirmation that it was there all along and that his perception of things was real. Um, Again, I think they could have done a little bit more to sort of explain why his character is in such pain and is so tortured.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm pretty
they
sure in
didn't.
every version of this story, that is kind of what happens to him, though, is that his faith is insufficient to
Well,
overcome
right. And
Barlow.
and I will say that this is one part that I'm like, huh. And Barlow kills him because his faith fails, so the little glowing crucifix fails. But and I could make an argument that with the other characters, as they're putting together popsicle stick crucifixes, they don't seem
Right?
to know totally what they're doing.
They
And so
don't know any prayers,
do they really have faith? I mean, so there's that part that bothered me just a little bit too.
yeah.
But in the book,
But none of them have gone up against Barlow with the old
true,
crucifix, and it certainly doesn't have the same effect on him as
it
with the
does on
other
other
baby
people.
vampires, does it?
But like Callahan in the book, the whole thing is that Barlow corrupts him, like puts his blood in him,
Oh
so
yeah.
he gets like rejected from the church, the consecrated grounds. And to me, that's like a lot more interesting, and that could have been a cool little thing, but they didn't do that. Instead, they just kill him off because his faith failed, which I guess is a neater ending and maybe what they needed to do in the tiny amount of time they had for this film to kind of wrap up loose ends.
Yeah.
But I did think that that was a more interesting storyline because that's like totally that's different than what's happened to any other character. Or maybe it isn't, and maybe we're just seeing what has happened to the other characters where like their faith fails or their lesser their the devils on their shoulder are the ones that win over them in the end.
We've also before Callahan gets killed here, it is a good scene. It's interesting the way all that unfolds. They've all gone back to the Marston house to find Straker's body. Susan, Ben, Dr. Cody, Father Callahan, and Mark. That's kind of everybody who's left in the town, as far as we know. Parkins is still out there, and this is where they split the party and decide everybody go off and find Susan's mom, Parkins, and Mark's parents, and then meet back at the church. How Mark's parents have been spared until this point, I'm not sure, but they might be the last like household of normal people left in town, which is kind of odd. The sun is getting perilously low. The sun moves very fast in this film, kind of like in a lot of vampire films that we talk about. You remember
Yep.
the Voyage of the Demeter, how how the
Yep.
days were 6 seconds long.
Yep.
Yeah, and then in the final scene of this film, the sun is just going like a freaking softball through the air. It's so fast. But so they split the party. We know this is going to end badly. But they're like, we'll meet at the church. No problem. Everybody's got their mission. Let's go. Callahan and Mark go off together. Susan and Ben go off together. And Dr. Cody goes and meets up with the constable pretty quickly. But he's like in plain clothes, getting into his unmarked car. He's locking up his office, and he's like, "I'm out of. I'm getting out of here. You should too." Uh, like again, he doesn't like to work.
Nope.
He's like, this place has gone bad. And don't talk to me about vampires. Although apparently he's clearly
Knows.
he's read in about it somehow.
Yeah.
Again, maybe a scene that was cut. And then yeah, Alfred Woodward is like, gosh darn it, and heads back to the church. I think she's the first one back there. Um, so and then Susan's mom, uh, this is pretty messed up how this scene goes, but she's like, "Oh, I met this great man. He owns the he owns the antique store. He just wants me to protect him during the day while he sleeps."
Mhm.
I'm not sure why Ben and Susan didn't run the hell out of that house as soon as she said that line.
Yeah, the minute she says that, you're done. You know that she's crazy. Get out. I mean, look, her weird organ playing before should have keyed them into the fact that she's a little crazy.
The
Um,
organ also, there's a vase or like a lamp on it that has the word Nux vomica on it,
mm,
which is the strychnine tree. Like her lamp has a poison like on the lamp on the body of this piece of furniture. It's the weirdest. It was clearly there to be looked at and noticed, but I'm like, why would you I mean, maybe she's an apothecary, but geez.
yeah, that's
Uh,
weird.
but yeah, and then it's Floyd Tibbets who bites Susan, who just comes out of the kitchen. Clearly, this is a daylight scene, but when there's not enough light coming into the houses, bad things happen. I'm Yeah. So bad news bears for Susan. Ben gets her to the church as fast as he can, but
Too late.
in the scene where Dr. Cody had been bitten by Jimmy's mom, they immediately injected her with a rabies shot, which apparently was good enough to save her.
Yeah, and also it was kind of through a sheet, so maybe there was some protection there too. So,
Maybe.
but it wasn't
But
quite as a full-blown bite as this was, I would
this is a
say.
full-blown bite, and even though, Ben gets her to the church as fast as he can, it's nighttime. As soon as they walk into the church, she's writhing, and Dr. Cody is not running to get her the rabies shot. That's for sure. I don't know if that would have helped at this point or
Yeah, I don't
not.
know. I think it was she was too far gone, and she starts getting rejected from the church. So there's that.
And she beats up Ben, and Ben runs out into the street after her. Uh, Dr. Cody yells, "It's not safe!" And Ben looks back at her and then looks back into the street, and there's just like 100 vampires there. Another good transition. I like that scene too. That was from the trailer. I remember seeing that one.
Yep.
And then he runs back in. She
This was a
honestly,
great scene. This was a
yeah.
great little action scene because it's like he's trying to get back to the consecrated ground. She comes out with a little glowing thing, and he gets put like, and she
Well, she
throws.
throws him a steak because
Yes,
at
right.
first Mike Ryerson, is that his name? God, there's
Yeah,
too many Matt Mike Marks in
I
this
know.
movie.
There's a lot of that.
Mike
Anyway,
Ryerson picks him up and tries to fly up to the roof, and you
yep.
just hear a squelch and a thud, and then Ben lands on top of Mike, who has been staked, and his eyes are gone back to normal. So that was a really nice assist where she throws him a steak, and he manages to stake a vampire while it's flying off with him. Well done.
Great. And then I
Uh,
love like the rejection of the vampires, like when they're in the church. That's kind of cool. So
yeah. Um, and then they're in the church. Um, I think, yeah, they're the only two who spend the night in the church because everybody else, Father Callahan has been killed at this point. Mark has run into a treehouse and closed the little doors and windows. Again, this rule about, having to be invited in is kind of saving his ass right here. Um, but this was one of those scenes where the floaty kid vampires were a little bit fake looking.
yep.
And also Parkins gets thrown through the window of the church completely just dead, like ripped open, bleeding out, dead as doornail. And you're like, why didn't they turn? They've turned everybody else except for Ralphie and maybe Father Callahan because he doesn't show up again. But isn't that curious? Why
Yep.
why does Parkins just get murdered and then thrown inside to like demoralize
Again,
them?
it feels like there's something that we're missing that maybe got left on the editing room floor here. Because it doesn't feel like there does feel like there's a reason why they did that. So I don't know if he was doing something differently than other people in the town. Maybe he was being this, even though he doesn't like to work and whatever. Maybe there was something cut out where he actually was trying to help them or something like that. But it felt very personal the way they did it.
Yeah.
So that was a mystery to me that I was like, I wish that they had wrapped up that loose end a little bit better to understand why they did that with him. Um, but
The next day, we're back in the we're back in Salem's Lot. Mark has covered the bodies of his parents and Father Callahan, who are all just dead and not turned,
yep.
interestingly. Or maybe they're going to turn later. I don't know. But they're certainly just corpses on the floor in this scene. And then
If I know Mark, he probably staked them all because he took care of business. Like I can't imagine that he left them to come back
that's
because
actually a very good point. Yeah.
he feels so strongly about Ralphie and about Danny. So I just don't think he would have left them like that. And then leaves them a note.
I'm going to kill Barlow.
Yep, very clear. And then,
But then he breaks into the antique store. I think for whatever reason they've decided that Barlow's not in the Marston house anymore. I'm not again, I think this is some information that they got that
yeah.
suggests that they don't know where Barlow is, even though every time we've seen him, he's been in the Marlow in the Marlow Marston house. So he goes into the antique store. This is that scene I was talking about before, where there's not like open those curtains. This is
Mhm.
dark. It's dark in here.
Yep.
And Mark almost gets got by Danny. Another good jump scare, but he was a little faster on the draw, and he has managed to stake Danny. And as Danny's vampire self is dying, Mark's just very matter of factly like, "Hey, I promised you that I would save you,"
Yep.
because he's a psychopath in the best way possible.
Or a
He's the
really
psychopath we need in this story for sure.
or a really good friend.
Such a
Um,
good friend. He's such a good friend. He's willing to murder, well, the vampire version of
the
you.
vampire version. Um, and then, our little crew continues on their way. And
Littler crew. Wait, yeah. So it's Cody, Ben, Susan, and Mark, and they're like, "What's missing from this town? Cars." And
Mhm.
we've because we had our first act drive-in scene
It's
and
not
that
Susan's
little
son, right?
the what? Sorry,
Susan's vampire now. So that's
Susan.
not
Susan is a vampire. You're right. It's
it's
just
just
Cody,
me,
Ben, and
and Ben.
Mark. Yeah,
Mhm.
but we'd had that scene at the drive-in where some kids got out of the trunk of a car. So I guess so they avoided paying for the entrance to the drive-in. I'm pretty sure this is completely manufactured for this version of the story.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a drive-in in any of the other ones,
So,
but
and
it's
this
not
also
bad.
is not, it's a fine idea. I don't
Yeah,
mind it. I like the little lead in and the callback where she's like, oh, yes, it's a tradition where
yeah,
people come to the drive-in in their trunks, which is weird.
it is
But
pretty weird.
anyway, but the fact is, when they realize what it is, and Ben goes and finds Susan's car, and she's like, her little vampire self is in the trunk. I mean, to me, at this point, time is of the essence. Sun's going down. Start opening those trunks and letting the sunlight in.
I mean,
Um,
sun is going down. Why don't they just go into a house, close all the doors and windows, and not answer the door if somebody knocks on it?
or go back to the church. What are you doing? You know that they can't get into the church. So
Yeah.
that's kind of odd to me that they don't do that.
They
But
choose to do this thing at the 11th hour. The sun, like I said, is moving and like it's so the sun has been set on fast forward.
yep.
And suddenly they're running out of daylight very quickly. As Dr. Cody goes to stake Susan, she gets killed by Susan's mom, who has become, yeah, as we know, like the new familiar. And she apparently has never-ending shotgun shells, which is a big bummer.
Hmm.
I recognize this actor too, who's playing Susan's mom. I
Oh
can't
yeah,
place her.
she is this like incredible character actor. So she's in tons and tons and tons of television. She's in I'm trying
Deborah
to
Christopherson is her
yeah,
name.
she's in so much. And I'm trying to think there's something specific that you would recognize her from.
God, she's been on TV since 1982 in TJ
Yeah,
Hooker.
no, yeah, totally. Like, so she's been in she's always like this kind of like special, usually she plays like some kind of weird character, often on like, I feel like she was in like CSI or something like that, or like those are the kinds of characters that she's
Yeah.
often in.
It looks like
And
she was on the whole run of Carnival on HBO, which I
oh, there you
did
go.
watch.
Yeah. But she's, like one of those kinds of actors that you see everywhere, and she often plays like kind of this unhinged type of character, and this is another one that she plays.
No, not a
Oh,
departure from the norm then. Yeah.
nope, nope, nope.
She's shooting at these guys, and as the sun goes behind the screen for the drive-in, all the car trunks are popping open and vampires are starting to walk out. Even though the sun's not totally down, they're in the shade. And so it's could work out for the vampires here where Susan's mom is keeping Ben and Mark pinned down. Dr. Cody is definitely dead, and which is a bummer, but yeah, I think Jimmy Cody also dies in weird ways in the other versions of the story too, like falling onto a pit of spikes that the vampires put out for them. I think is one of the ways that Jimmy Cody goes out, but in this case, just shot through the back with a shotgun and definitely dead. Uh, Mark gets into a car once again, the hero we need, and drives through the screen, collapsing it just as Ben is in a real tough spot because Susan's mom really hates Ben for derailing the whole Floyd Tibbetts relationship,
Yep.
which is just a funny small town sort of like, oh, let's make this the reason why she really hates Ben.
Hmm.
Also, there's the whole xenophobia angle of this town and outsiders, and she's yelling "outsider" at him a lot while she's shooting at him.
Well, I mean, she didn't want Susan to leave, and that was the thing too, because
True.
obviously an outsider is going to take her daughter out. So she gives kind of mom from Carrie vibes a bit too. That's the vibe. Where Carrie's mom was like kind of psycho and not quite. This is Carrie's mom was even worse, but this is also a very unhinged and strange woman. So, not healthy relationships by any means. So,
Mark though basically kills 99% of the vampires in town by collapsing the screen,
yep.
and
Mark.
then he runs over Susan. Like he basically is taking care of all
Telling
the
you,
business.
he is the familiar killer. He is the familiar. He just takes him out. He's like,
Yep.
yeah.
You want to be a familiar, you're gonna have to deal with Mark, or a vampire for that matter.
Yep.
Then they find a big truck that has a coffin in the back of it. They're like, "Yep, that's Barlow." And then they try to open it, and they're having really hard time doing that. The sun goes down so fast that they don't have time to do it. And the coffin like flies up into the sky at
Hmm.
some point, which I thought was kind of interesting. They go hide inside the projection office, but Susan is in there,
Yep.
and she starts beating the hell out of Ben. Mark gets thrown out the window and then hides from Barlow under the screen that he has knocked over. So, he's in a tough spot. He's turning on headlights. I don't know that that's going to help him.
Yeah. And then, Barlow's coming for him.
But
And then
Ben kills Susan too in this
finally,
scene. It takes him a while, but he has to stake her.
well, if he'd only done that in the first place, maybe Dr. Cody would still be alive.
But
So
maybe I mean, Susan's mom was definitely ready to shoot whoever was about to stake
true.
Susan. So
True.
she's just wandering around that parking lot with her shotgun, like ready, ready to shoot
Well,
people.
and then, I mean, I do like the chase scene between Barlow and Mark, and then as he's like looking through and his face is coming through, it's pretty terrifying. And I will say, Ben's this whole shot where Ben stakes Barlow through the mouth,
Hmm.
like through the back of the head, through the mouth, and then you see Ben in the hole that he has made with the
Yeah, that was a
stake
pretty
is
good
pretty
shot.
rough,
That was a good
but
shot.
good. And then he just fully stakes him, and the light goes out of his eyes. I mean, he went down a little bit more quickly than I would have expected Barlow to go down, knowing what we know about him and how powerful he is. But maybe a stake through the back of the head kind of incapacitates somebody enough to be able to do the deed.
Yeah.
Um, Got a lot of questions though, because, now, Mark says to Ben, like, do you think we got everybody? And Ben doesn't really totally answer, so maybe, maybe not. But
I think he says yeah.
he
He
says
says
yeah,
yeah.
but like how would we know?
I don't
Anyway,
know.
so and then suddenly him and Mark, he's like taking Mark out of town. Well, guess what, Ben? You probably have to figure out how the custody works for Mark at some point. It's like kind of a weird thing. Um,
This is my son. I have no paperwork.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
like, okay. And Mark says, and he,
Honestly, Mark doesn't need parents. Come
nah,
on.
he's a familiar killer, so it's all good.
Yeah.
But
He's gonna go to Europe and just keep doing what he's doing.
right. But anyway, they are kind of a good team, and I'd like to think positive things are their way. And Where are they going to go after this? Who knows? But it is a little bit of drive off into the sunset, the two survivors and getting away from this evil, strange town. Um, and so I do, I mean, like, look, the Jerusalem's Lot appears in like other, it's referenced in other things. It was referenced in Castle Rock. I don't know if they actually go and visit it during that series, but they do reference it that it's like 36 miles from Castle Rock and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So it does make an appearance in that universe. Who knows what's next, but look, I thought this was kind of a fun, campy movie. There were I think there were things that could have made it a little bit more successful, but I actually really liked it, and I
Like,
thought
do you
that
think it would have been better as a 3 hour movie?
maybe, or maybe as like maybe as a miniseries or something
Yeah.
where because you to develop some of this stuff and especially to have some of this have a little bit more impact. Like I even feel like Mark's parents, even though they died and Mark was upset, it was still like a kind of a throwaway. Like we didn't really get to know them before.
No,
Again,
that
not
was their first scene. They had
right.
one
So
scene in the film, and it was the when they
like so
died. Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen this like maybe like a 4 episode miniseries or even 6 episodes just to kind of develop some of these things. But
I mean, you
um
knew they were dead though, because even when Callahan is talking to them, it's already dark outside.
oh
He's like,
yeah, they're gonna
"Please,
be
just
dead.
come with us." I know this sounds
Yeah,
crazy, but like they've clearly already wasted half an hour.
they've wasted
Like,
a long time. And so yeah, so I just think that there were little things that could have made this better, but I thought the cinematography was great. I thought the acting was great.
yeah,
Even some of the campiness I thought was fun.
yeah,
And I think if you know, it's to me, it's like they sort of were dragging their heels about getting this out there and I kind of feel bad for them because I do think that this was probably one of the pandemic victims just with the post-production and things like that. Kudos to Stephen King for pushing people to get this out there, but it could have been, I just think that this had a lot of promise and maybe in another like if things had been slightly different it would have been they could have spent the time and maybe edited it a little differently,
yeah.
but I had
It's
fun with this. I had fun with this. I thought this was
I would like to see the director's cut at some
yeah,
point. I doubt that
dude,
they'll
because
ever
I
do
do
that because of how difficult it was to even get this part of it
I know,
out.
but I thought the same thing. I was like, I wish we could see the things that they left out here.
Yeah.
But all good though. So
Yeah,
would
so I think it's definitely more than the 2 stars that a lot of people gave it, but that's
agree.
because also, hearing that HA and I think are softies when it comes to a lot of these kinds of projects. We want to like them more.
That's true.
And while this had problems, it was still a fun watch. So I would have given it at least 3.5 stars out of
I would
five.
too. And I don't, the gripes that I saw some people, I mean, I think I saw like a lot of people kind of saying the same things about the plot holes, but I did also see some positive things and people that enjoyed it, as we did. So
Yeah.
I don't think that it deserves that star rating. But yeah. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this or disliked this film, let us know. Send us a line, drop us a line at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com.
And you can find all of our episodes online at reanimated.podbean.com. And yeah, come back again next time when we talk about more undead stuff on Reanimated. So, toodaloo.
Ciao.